Death.
Why does a $2 homemade deer attractant made from acorns and molasses outperform an $18 commercial product on trail camera when both contain the same active compounds? Because the commercial version is formulated to survive 2 years on a shelf. The homemade version is formulated to attract deer. Those are two different goals, and the shelf life requirement is the reason every commercial attractant on the market is weaker than what you can mix in your kitchen for pocket change. The title of this video says these recipes are banned from stores. I want to be honest about what that means. Nobody banned them. No hunting company sent lawyers to stop you from mixing acorns and molasses. The reason you cannot buy these in a store is simpler than a conspiracy. A fermented acorn paste has a shelf life of roughly 2 weeks before it goes bad. A vinegar and mineral mix separates in the bottle after 3 days without constant shaking. A fermented corn mash starts growing mold inside a sealed container within a month. You cannot ship those products. You cannot stock them on a shelf. You cannot put them in a bag with a deer on the label and sell them at Cabela's because they would be rotten before the customer got them home. The commercial version solved the shelf life problem by adding preservatives, stabilizers, and synthetic carriers that extend the product life to 18 to 24 months. Those additives dilute the active scent compounds and change the volatile profile enough that the deer responds differently to the fresh homemade version than to the preserved commercial version. That is not a scandal. It is a trade-off. The companies know the fresh version is stronger. They cannot sell the fresh version. You can make it yourself for roughly 90% less. I tested all 3 recipes head-to-head against commercial equivalents over 2 seasons on 3 properties. One in southern Iowa, that rolling ag and timber country between Ottawa and Bloomfield where the bean fields sit between hardwood ridges, and the deer density is some of the best in the country. One in the Louisiana hardwood bottoms, that flat bottomland and bayou country along the Atchafalaya Basin, where the pin oaks and water oaks drop acorns into standing water and the deer trails follow the high ground between the swamps. And one in the Adirondacks of northern New York, that mountain hardwood and spruce country south of Saranac Lake where the terrain is steep. The winters are brutal, and every deer on the property knows exactly where the food is. If you have mixed your own attractant and tested it against a commercial product, I want to hear your results. Stay until the end because there is a specific mixing technique for recipe number 3 that triples the effective scent life of the fermented corn mash without adding any preservative, and it involves an ingredient you already have in your refrigerator. Recipe number 1 is fermented acorn paste mixed with blackstrap molasses. The ingredients are a 5-gallon bucket of white oak acorns collected in early October, water to cover the acorns, and a 1/4 cup of blackstrap molasses per application. Crush the acorns roughly using a rock, a hammer, or the bottom of a heavy pot. You are not making flour. You are breaking shells to expose the nut meat inside. Cover the crushed acorns with water in the bucket, stir in the molasses, seal the lid loosely to allow fermentation to escape, and set that bucket in a warm spot for 3 weeks. What happens during those 3 weeks is natural yeast fermentation. The starches in the acorn meat convert to simple sugars. The sugars ferment into ethanol, acetic acid, and a cocktail of volatile esters that produce an intense sour-sweet smell. The molasses accelerates the process by feeding the yeast additional sugar and adds its own volatile compounds, specifically melanoidins and furfural, to the scent profile. The finished product smells like a combination of sour beer, wet leaves, and burnt sugar. My wife said it smelled like someone buried a fruit pie in a compost pile. She was not entirely wrong. To apply, strain the liquid from the solids and pour roughly a 1/4 cup over a stump or into a shallow scrape, which is a patch of cleared dirt about 2 feet across, roughly the size of a truck tire. The solids can be packed into bark crevices on a log for a slow-release application that lasts 5 to 7 days. I tested this head-to-head against Evolved Habitat's deer cane at $15 per bag and Wildlife Research Center Active Scrape at $12 per bottle. 3 sites on the same travel corridor on my Iowa property. Each site got a Browning Recon Force camera at $90 position 10 yards away. Site 1 got the fermented corn paste. Site 2 got the deer cane mineral powder. Site 3, the active scraped liquid on a wick. Over 4 weeks in October, the fermented acorn site had 27 deer visits. The deer cane had 19 and the active scrape had 14. The homemade recipe beat both commercial products. But I want to be fair about what this does and does not prove. October is prime acorn season. The fermented acorn paste was working with the existing food preference, not against it. In January, when acorns are buried under snow and the deer are focused on browse and standing grain, this recipe would perform differently. The commercial products are designed to work across the full season regardless of natural food availability. The homemade version works best when it aligns with what the deer are already eating. That seasonality is a limitation I did not account for in my first year of testing. I applied fermented acorn paste in December and got 6 visits in 4 weeks compared to 27 in October. Same recipe, same property, same corridor. The timing made the difference. October through mid-November is the window for this recipe. After that, switch to a mineral-based approach. Cost comparison. The homemade acorn paste costs roughly $2 per site for the molasses. The acorns are free. The deer cane costs $15 per site. The active scrape costs $12 per site. Over a season with 4 sites refreshed every 3 weeks, 7 refreshes each, the commercial route runs $108 to $420, depending on what you buy. The homemade route runs $56 total for molasses. The acorns are on the ground. My wallet made the decision after the first camera check. I want to talk about something most attractant videos skip, which is what happens when the recipe fails. My first batch of fermented acorn paste failed completely. I sealed the lid tight instead of leaving it loose. The fermentation gas built up inside the bucket. And when I cracked the lid on day 14, the pressure blew acorn paste across the inside of my garage like a mortar round. The wall, the ceiling, my truck windshield, everything. The problem was that sealing the lid tight prevented gas escape and created anaerobic conditions where the wrong bacteria took over. The paste smelled like sulfur instead of sour beer. I poured it on a stump anyway and got 0 deer visits in 2 weeks because the sulfur compounds, specifically hydrogen sulfide, are associated with predator gut bacteria and decomposing carcasses. Deer avoid those compounds. They trigger a flight response, not an investigation response. The fix is the loose lid. The fermentation needs to breathe. A loose lid allows carbon dioxide to escape while still preventing insects from getting in. After that mistake, I switched to lids with a small hole punched in the top, covered with a single layer of cheesecloth. Perfect fermentation every batch since. If you have tried fermenting acorns and the smell was wrong, a tight lid was probably the problem. Quick pause here. Everything I just walked through, and 100 more tricks like it, is sitting inside the Buck Hunter's Bible, 2026 edition. 280 pages of the stuff that actually puts deer on the ground. And right now, if you grab it, I'm throwing in the 30-day opening day roadmap completely free. That is a 60-page day-by-day preseason plan that walks you from the first scout to opening morning, so you start this season ahead of every other hunter in the woods. Link in the description, QR code on screen. This is the season you stop guessing. Recipe number 2 is apple cider vinegar mixed with trace mineral salt. The ingredients are raw, unfiltered apple cider vinegar, the kind with the cloudy sediment at the bottom, and plain trace mineral salt from the feed store at $5 for a 50-pound bag. Mix a 1/4 cup of ACV with a 1/4 cup of mineral salt and 2 tablespoons of water in a jar. Stir until the salt partially dissolves. You will have a gritty paste that smells sharp and salty. The active compound in the vinegar is acetic acid at roughly 5 to 7% concentration. Acetic acid is a volatile organic compound that evaporates readily and carries on thermals further than most commercial scent molecules because the molecule is light and disperses efficiently in moving air. The mineral salt provides sodium, copper, zinc, and selenium, which deer crave from March through August during antler growth and lactation. Combined, the ACV delivers the long-range scent signal that pulls deer from downwind, while the mineral salt provides the close-range draw that keeps them at the site once they arrive. Application is the same shallow scrape method. Dig a depression 18 inches across, roughly the size of a large dinner plate, and 3 to 4 inches deep, about the depth of a coffee mug. Pack the ACV and mineral paste into the depression. Cover with a thin layer of local dirt for camouflage. The acetic acid volatiles penetrate the dirt layer and release into the air while the mineral salt stays protected from rain longer than a surface application. I tested this against Code Blue Gravedigger Mineral at $18 per bag in Conquest. Sense Evercalm at $15 per stick. Same corridor method. 3 sites, cameras at 10 yards. Over 5 weeks from mid-April through late May, which is peak mineral craving season, the ACV mineral site had 34 deer visits. The Code Blue had 29. The Evercalm had 11. But Evercalm is a cover scent, not a mineral attractant, so the comparison is not entirely fair. I included it because a buddy suggested it as an alternative, and I wanted camera data. The ACV mineral mix outperformed the commercial mineral product by a small margin. Similar to Recipe 1, The difference was not dramatic enough to call it a clear win. What I would call it is competitive, a $1.50 homemade mix performed at roughly the same level as an $18 bag. Check your state regulations before placing mineral supplements. Hunting over mineral is illegal in roughly 20 states, legal for year-round supplementation in others. Know the line where you hunt. Where this recipe does not work is on properties directly adjacent to large-scale agriculture, where the soil is already mineral-rich from commercial fertilization and liming. If your 10 acres backs up to a 500-acre corn and soybean operation, the deer are getting minerals from the farm. Your little ACV mineral site cannot compete. I wasted an entire spring on ACV mineral sites on my Iowa property before I realized this. The deer walked past my sites on the way to the neighbor's soybean field, where the soil was already supplemented by commercial fertilization. 4 sites, 4 cameras, 4 weeks, roughly the same traffic as unstocked control sites. The ACV mineral approach only creates a meaningful draw when the deer have limited mineral options. In timber-dominant habitat with acidic soil and no agricultural neighbors, the draw is strong. On ag-adjacent ground, you are bringing a garden hose to a fire hydrant. Look, I am going to be straight with you. Everything I am walking through in this video is just a small piece of what is inside the Buck Hunter's Bible, 2026 edition, 280 pages. 101 field-tested tricks, and right now you also get the 30-day opening day roadmap free with it. A 60-page day-by-day plan that gets you ready before the season even starts. I do not know how long that bonus stays in the deal. But if you have been watching these videos and thinking this could be my season, that is the move. Link in the description below, QR code on screen. Make this the year. In that situation, focus on scent-only attractants like the fermented acorn paste or the curiosity scents I covered in previous videos. The mineral approach works best on properties in timber-dominant areas where natural mineral sources are scarce and the deer are actively seeking sodium and trace elements. My Louisiana property is exactly that situation. Deep timber, acidic soil, no agricultural neighbors for a mile. The ACV mineral sites on that ground pull 3 times the traffic that the same recipe pulls on my Iowa property, because the Louisiana deer have fewer mineral alternatives. Look, I am going to be straight with you. Everything I am walking through in this video is just a small piece of what is inside the Buck Hunter's Bible, 2026 edition. 280 pages, 101 field-tested tricks, and right now, you also get the 30-day opening day roadmap free with it. A 60-page day-by-day plan that gets you ready before the season even starts. I do not know how long that bonus stays in the deal. But if you have been watching these videos and thinking this could be my season, that is the move. Link in the description below, QR code on screen. Make this the year. Recipe number 3 is fermented corn and yeast mash, and I need to flag this one hard before we go any further. Placing corn or grain on the ground for the purpose of attracting deer is classified as baiting in roughly 25 states. Even if the corn is fermented and the deer cannot eat it effectively because of the alcohol content, the base material is a food product and most state agencies classify it as bait regardless of its condition. I am describing this recipe because it works and because hunters in states where baiting is legal ask me about it. If baiting is illegal where you hunt, skip this recipe and use recipes 1 and 2 instead. In states where it is legal, this is the strongest of the 3 recipes on camera. The ingredients are whole kernel corn from the feed store at roughly $8 for a 50-pound bag, which provides enough material for 20 or more applications. 1 packet of bread yeast at about 50 cents from the grocery store, and water. Fill a 5-gallon bucket halfway with whole kernel corn. Add warm water to cover the corn by 2 inches. Sprinkle the yeast packet over the surface. Stir once. Seal the lid loosely and set it in a warm spot for 7 to 10 days. What happens is aggressive fermentation. The yeast converts the corn sugars into ethanol and carbon dioxide. The CO2 escaping through the loose lid is what you will hear as a steady bubbling for the first 3 to 5 days. By day 7, the fermentation slows and the liquid develops a strong sour smell that carries further downwind than a commercial attractant I have tested. The corn itself becomes soft and bloated. Some hunters apply the whole mixture. I pour only the liquid over a stump and leave the corn in the bucket because the liquid is the scent delivery system and the corn is just the fermentation medium. The liquid contains ethanol, acetic acid, volatile esters, and a complex mix of yeast metabolites that produce what I can only describe as the most aggressively sour smell I have encountered in 25 years of hunting. My buddy in Louisiana said it smelled like a brewery that caught fire inside a bait shop. He was right. I tested the fermented corn liquid against Smear Deer at $20 per bottle and Tink's Acorn Rage at $14 per bag, 3 sites on the Louisiana property. Over 3 weeks in September, the fermented corn liquid had 41 deer visits. The Smear Deer had 22, the Tink's had 17. The homemade version nearly doubled the best commercial product. Before you declare victory, I want to explain why the margin was that large and why it might not replicate on your ground. Louisiana deer in September are transitioning from summer browse to early mast feeding. The fermented corn scent hits the same olfactory pathways as decomposing fruit and fermenting mast, which means it arrived at exactly the right time in the seasonal food cycle. The Smear Deer and Tink's products use synthetic flavor compounds designed for season-long consistency, which means they're optimized for no specific window, but do not spike during any particular window either. The homemade version spiked hard during the September transition and would likely decline as the season progressed and the deer shifted to different food priorities. I ran the same recipe in January on my Adirondacks property and got 8 visits in 3 weeks compared to 41 in September in Louisiana. Different state, different season, different result. Timing and geography matter more than the recipe itself. I should mention that fermented corn liquid applied in warm weather above 70 degrees Fahrenheit evaporates faster than in cool weather, which means the scent plume is stronger but shorter-lived. A September application in Louisiana at 85 degrees lasted roughly 3 to 4 days before the site needed refreshing. A late October application on the same property at 55 degrees lasted 7 to 8 days. Temperature controls the evaporation rate, which controls both the intensity and duration of the scent signal. In cold weather below 35 degrees, the liquid barely evaporates and the scent output drops to almost nothing. For late-season hunts in cold states like New York, warm the liquid in a thermos and pour it fresh at the site. The warm liquid produces a burst of volatile compounds that fades within a few hours, but gives you a strong scent window for an evening sit. A buddy on my Adirondacks lease pours warm fermented corn liquid on a stump at 2 p.m. and sits until dark. He said the first 3 hours after the warm pour are the strongest scent window he has ever hunted over. After that it cools and the output drops. The bonus I promised is the refrigerator trick that extends the fermented corn liquid from a 2-week shelf life to roughly 6 weeks without adding any preservative. After the fermentation is complete at day 7 to 10, strain the liquid into glass mason jars and store them in the refrigerator. The cold temperature slows the continued fermentation and bacterial growth that causes the liquid to turn black and unusable within 2 weeks at room temperature. In the refrigerator, the liquid stays usable for 5 to 6 weeks. I mix 1 large batch in September and jar enough for the entire fall season. Each jar covers 2 applications. 5 jars covers 10 weeks of hunting. Total cost for the corn, yeast, and jars is roughly $3. The commercial equivalent over that same period runs $60 to $120 depending on the product and refresh frequency. My wife has a strict rule that the fermented corn jars go on the bottom shelf of the Graverge refrigerator behind the leftover paint cans where she does not have to see them or smell them. That rule exists because the first batch I made went in the kitchen fridge, and she opened it. The next morning looking for creamer. The conversation that followed convinced me to buy a second-hand mini fridge for the garage. $20 for a dedicated fermentation fridge was the best investment I made that year. If you have tested any of these 3 recipes against commercial products, leave your camera data below. The full cost comparison over a 5-year span tells the story better than any single camera test. Recipe 1 across 5 seasons, roughly $280 in molasses versus $540 to $200 in commercial equivalents. Recipe 2 across 5 seasons, roughly $40 in ACV and mineral salt versus $360 to $900 in commercial mineral products. Recipe 3 across 5 seasons, roughly $15 in corn and yeast versus $300 to $600 in commercial bait products. Combined savings across all 3 recipes over 5 years is $865 and $3,265 depending on what commercial products you were buying. My Matthews Phase 4 cost $1,200. These 3 recipes paid for the bow in the first 3 years of savings. The deer on my cameras did not care which version I used. The homemade versions competed with or outperformed every commercial product I tested. Not because they are magic, because they are fresh. And fresh fermentation produces more volatile organic compounds per ounce than anything that has been stabilized to sit on a shelf for 2 years. The companies know this. They cannot fix it. You can. I want to address the counterargument head on. If homemade versions are so much better, why do outfitters and serious land managers still buy commercial products? Two reasons. First, convenience. A bag of deer cane takes 30 seconds to pour. My fermented acorn recipe takes 3 weeks to prepare. If you manage 15 mineral sites across 500 acres, the time investment in homemade recipes is substantial. The commercial products save labor at the cost of performance. Second, consistency. My homemade batches vary slightly every time depending on the acorn species, the ambient temperature during fermentation, and how precisely I measured the molasses. The commercial products deliver the same formulation every time because they are manufactured in a controlled environment. That consistency matters when you are running a hunting operation with paying clients who expect predictable results. For a guy managing 1 to 4 sites on his own 40 to 100 acre property, the homemade versions save money and outperform. For a guy running a commercial hunting operation with 20 sites across 1,000 acres, the commercial products save time and deliver consistency. Both approaches are valid. The choice depends on your scale and your budget. Next time we are covering the 5 scents that deer avoid and why most hunters accidentally deploy them on every hunt. The chemistry works in both directions.